So, yeah, I have a little bit of a unique perspective, I think, on confession because, like I said, I was a Protestant pastor and working in the downtown area where they're very serious, they call them social pathologies, okay, like really a lot of brokenness, drug use, bad relationships, bad family structure, the whole rundown of the problem of our of inner city America. So I was doing ministry down there, and there's a lot of demonic activity going on in our downtowns, really all over our culture, but our downtowns in particular. And I would encounter people that would start having, kind of visible manifestations of the evil that was going on. So it was clear that something supernatural was happening in their lives that they needed to be delivered from and freed from. And I had no training for this, but thankfully one of my parishioners got me in touch with an older gentleman who was what we called as Protestants a deliverance minister. Somebody is a little bit like a Catholic exorcist, except Protestant equivalent. And so I started to work with him, and it was fascinating because when I began to work with him, I thought, oh, I'm going to take people to him, and then he's going to call up the demon, and we're going to get all this drama like you see in the movies. Now, he had done that earlier in his career, but he and others had hit on a better way. So when I began to bring people to him to be delivered, we would sit in a room together with other Christians there for prayer support. And he would pray to bind any demons that were present and that they would not manifest themselves. And then he had a big binder full of this massive lists of sins. And he would turn that around and push that across the table to the person who was coming for freedom. And he would say, just read down this list, and anything that you've done, confess and renounce in the presence of these fellow believers. And that process would take about 2 hours. But at the end of it, invariably, people were just full of joy. Okay, just so light, like walking a foot off the ground. You'd think that this would be a painful experience
Yes.
of like confessing sin, but actually it turned out to be a joyful experience. And without fail, everybody who went through this left with this sense of levity and just like this, sense of freedom and joy. So I talked with this guy. Well, let's just call him Hank. Okay, I talked with Hank. Like, how did you discover this? And he said that back in the 70s, when the charismatic revival began, they got into deliverance and they tried to do what we called as Protestants a power encounter, more like a traditional exorcism where you call up the demon by name and force them out by the name of Jesus. And that does happen. That can work. But it was so traumatic because they would have these supernatural manifestations, and there was even like liability issue, like if somebody gets hurt, you could get sued and so on. So they were looking for a better way, and they stumbled into a fact that if they could encourage people to confess and renounce the sins that had allowed the spirits to come into their life, the spirits would go. And then because it was sometimes hard to discern what had been the entry point, they just said, well, we'll nuke it all. Okay, let's just confess everything, right? Nuke it all, and then we'll be clean. And so they started this process of confessing just everything. And they found that the spiritual freedom that people attained from that process was better and more lasting than their experience from these power encounters of casting out. And then later, years later, after I converted to the Catholic Church, I basically found that same doctrine present in the writings of Father Gabriel Amorth, who is the chief exorcist of Rome for John Paul II. He likewise says that when people came to him from all over the world for an exorcism, he would just start with a general confession, which hopefully people recognize what we are basically doing as Protestants was an unauthorized general confession. But there's this little back door in Catholic theology that people don't know about, that you can receive sacraments by desire. It's best known with baptism by desire, but all the sacraments can be received through purity of desire. And God, who's sovereignly free, can grant the grace of the sacraments to those who have a pure desire for it, sometimes in extraordinary circumstances without the medium of the sacrament. So I think that Elizabeth, if we had to analyze theologically what was happening, I think that even though we were well-meaning and sincere, we had bad formation, but we were attaining a pure desire for the sacrament of reconciliation. I think that God was granting those graces through these Protestant, rituals that we were doing. And so I think that people were experiencing genuine freedom from that. How much more so when we do it the proper way with the authorization of the church and all of that. And so, again, Father Amorth says that the majority of the time, all people need to be free from the influence of evil spirits is to make a general confession. And that's what we were discovering in a kind of a backwards way.
Hello, hello. Did you guys know that I am very active over on Instagram? My handle is @discerningmarriage, and it is the only platform where I personally engage with my DMs. I personally engage with my comments. I kind of joke in my heart that I'm running a bit of an advice column in my DMs because people will trust me with their stories, which is so amazing. And then I get the opportunity to just give them my feedback on what's going on. It's one of my favorite parts of this work. So if you have a question for me directly, please go onto Instagram and send me that DM. It would bless me so much if you would follow me. The way that Instagram works is that the more that people engage with the content, the more that it puts it in the face of people who may end up needing it. So my heart is so much to evangelize and to bring the gospel to the people who need it. And you would bless me so much by helping me in that mission by engaging on Instagram. I would be so grateful.